Let's go ahead and call to order this October 16th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Can you call the roll?
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Okay. We consulted with the city attorney and discussed some of our past meeting minutes and found that since they are not from quasi-judicial procedures, that we could go ahead and approve them with who is here and present, and that we can do that in one motion, all three sets of minutes. So do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second the motion.
Mr. Kenton?
Oh, sorry. Did we have any
Yes.
discussion or anything on,
Oh, I'm
on
sorry.
those? Thanks. No discussion?
All right.
Okay, thank you.
So we're voting on all three, just so everyone's aware. Mr. Kenton?
Aye.
Mr. Madrid?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
And Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Motion passes.
And me, yes. Okay, we're going to move on to our public hearing. We have case number ZON 2017-003. It's a planned unit development, and we're calling it the Alta PUD. Alta Englewood Station PUD. So just to give you an overview of how this will go this evening, we will open up the public hearing. We will hear from staff, then we'll hear from the applicant. We'll have an opportunity for public testimony. We'll have an opportunity for either staff or the applicant to come back up and provide rebuttal. Then we'll close the public hearing, have discussion, and then have a vote. Okay. Do we have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
Mr. Madrid?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Yes.
And Chair Townley?
Yes. Okay. Eric or Wade, would you like to come forward?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name.
Erik Sampson. So what I'm going to do with you this evening regarding this PUD is kind of just give you a brief overview of what the proposal is and how what they're proposing is relating to the Englewood Municipal Development Code. The applicants are going to give a more in-depth presentation on the actual guts of the project, so please refrain from any questions until you have a chance to hear the entire presentation. Can I click?
New batteries?
There we go. So this is the overview of the site. The site to the buildings directly to the north is the CubeSmart self-storage facility, and the building to the south is the EarthTrex indoor climbing gym. So the location of the PUD would be in the area highlighted in yellow between these two buildings. The subject property has already been subdivided, and so that area in the yellow is the actual basically the property boundaries. This zoning is currently I-1, light industrial, and it sits on 4.22 acres. One thing to note in this process, in this PUD process, is the rest of the land surrounding that subject parcel is zoned I-1. It's all zoned light industrial. So our zoning code does not allow in that situation for a base district rezoning. In a sense, that would just create a spot zone in a certain area. So the only way to change the use to what the applicant is wanting is to do a PUD process. And so that's why we are here tonight. So this is kind of an overhead aerial view of the parcel, the subject parcel as well. And I'll come back to that if needed. So overall, the applicants are proposing a 316-unit residential development, and that's 79 dwelling units per acre. It is a 4-story apartment complex, which will be wrapped around a 5-story parking structure to accommodate on-site parking, off-street parking, excuse me. So, and then some of the uses that were proposed in the PUD, you can kind of see on, I think it's like Exhibit A, the list of uses that would be allowed on the site. But the main focus of the applicant is that residential use. A lot of the uses that you see in that table in the site development plan, or excuse me, the district plan, is uses that are allowed in industrial, but many of the heavier industrial uses have been removed from that section. Uses such as auto sales, auto repair, storage, warehousing facilities, those uses have been removed from this PUD. And so in our code, what happens when we have a PUD is we have, it's a two-part process. There's a district plan and there's a site development plan. And as per our code, those two do not necessarily need to be approved in the same sitting. The applicant can come forward with the district plan and then come forward with the site development plan. That is allowed by our zoning, and so that is what you are going to be looking at tonight. And I wanted to make you aware of that, is that you're going to see a district plan tonight. And what you're going to see for a site development plan is basically early concept designs of what might go on that property. So that's something to keep in mind too as we go through this evening. So in relation to certain parts of the code, in the I-1 district right now, there is, if somebody were to come in and put up an industrial use, they could completely cover the parking lot as it is now with 0 setbacks, 100% lot coverage. What they are proposing in the PUD is to decrease that max lot coverage to 80% and include rear and side setbacks of 5 feet. They've also requested a max limitation height of 100 feet. In our current I-1 zoning, there is no max height. And the applicant is also requesting to reduce parking standards from our standard 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit to 1.3 per dwelling unit. Total spaces are 471, and that includes 10 guest spaces. And the 10 guest spaces would also be a reduction in the requirement from code. All bicycle parking standards will be met. They're planning on meeting the 158 spaces or 1 space per dwelling unit. And they are requesting an increase in the height of max signage from 25 feet to 50 feet. And that is largely to bring awareness to the development, and also the adjacent Earth Trex building does have signage that is approximately 45, 50 feet in height as well. So it would be standard with the surrounding. So overall, staff recommends approval of this PUD, or should say provide a favorable recommendation to City Council. Let's use that language. And so if this does move forward tonight, the next steps in the process would be a public hearing with City Council, and then following that, there will be a first reading of the PUD, a second reading of the PUD, and if that is approved, then there is a 30-day referendum period. So that's just kind of the course moving forward from this, and I think that's all I have.
My name's Dustin Jones. My address is 26 Dutch Creek Drive in Littleton. Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight to present. My name's Dustin Jones. I'm with Ogilvie Properties. We are the current owner of the site. We purchased the site in spring of 2017. We are a Colorado investor that purchases real estate along the Front Range, invests capital into either repurposing it or just revitalizing it in general. We've invested in over 30 projects over the past 22 years, with our very first project starting in Englewood, so it's great to be back. Regarding the former Sports Authority headquarters, obviously most recently it was utilized as the headquarters for Sports Authority and previously Gart Brothers. Prior to that, it did have a use as a big box retail center. And I think as we're seeing across the country right now, big box retail is really going through an evolution of sorts where it's having to evolve to different uses and purposes over this life cycle. So when we purchased the site, we did see the possibility for mixed use on this site being the highest and best use. And really, I think we're seeing that play out with Earth Trek's opening, a month ago, as the nation's largest indoor climbing gym. We have about 39,000 square feet left over in that building, where we've had significant activity on it, and we do believe we'll have an occupant in there by the end of first quarter of 2019. So this is all certainly really positive, but it's also left us with leftover land, quite honestly, that we have that we believe its highest and best use is as multifamily development. So really what our proposal will do by adding multifamily, in our mind, it continues with the activation of the site, helping it live not just during a congested work hour period, but really throughout the day by creating commercial businesses on site, retail on site with Earth Treks, and then ultimately a residential component. This really creates that live, work, play that I think has been a buzz phrase for a long time, particularly with jurisdictions trying to see that in their community. A lot of times it's very difficult to implement with the market, and we think in this case we're under a unique set of circumstances to actually accomplish that. So with that, a couple other things I'll mention real quickly is that multifamily is also going to add, is going to be an asset to all of the surrounding retail. Kyle will talk a little bit more about just the context of that, but we think it'll be a positive impact, bringing those residents to the area to contribute to the retail in Englewood, in addition to obviously helping with the constrained housing market in Englewood and in the surrounding area as well. Through a thorough review process with staff, we are reducing a significant number of uses from our current allowance under industrial, and the idea being obviously we wouldn't need those anymore for multifamily development. The proposal also allows us to really achieve the best of both worlds in our mind by adding more people, more activation of the site, creating that live, work, play environment, and really at the end of the day, less traffic than the previous office use. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy at Norris Design, who will talk a little bit more detail about the development. Thank you.
you.
My name is Wendy Birchler, 1101 Bannock Street, Denver, Colorado, 80204. I'm going to try to make this view a little bit bigger for all of you, if I can figure out how to do that. Awesome. Thanks, Dustin, and good evening. My name is Wendy, as I stated earlier, and I'm a planner and landscape architect with Norris Design, and I'm pleased to be here tonight on behalf of this project. We're interested in developing a multifamily residential community on the approximately 4.22 acre portion of the property that was once a portion of the Sports Authority corporate campus, located generally at 1050 Hampden Street. I'm going to give a brief history of this project, and we'll talk about the PUD district plan. Then I'll hand it over to Kyle Henderson from Wood Partners, who will discuss Wood Partners' multifamily experience and why they think this site is a great fit for their next residential community. Kathy Parker, an architect with Studio PBA, is going to give an overview of the concept plan that Wood Partners has submitted and how it complies with the PUD district plan that is before you tonight. The project was replatted in early 2018, and the subject site for PUD rezoning is on approximately 4.22 acres. The rezoning of the site will allow for additional uses not allowed under the current I-1 zoning, including residential and other uses. The rezoning will also remove certain uses currently allowed by the zone district. The property is an urban infill site, thus sufficient infrastructure to serve the project is already in place directly adjacent to the site. Water service provided by the City of Englewood will connect to existing water lines in South Jason Street and West Kenyon Avenue. Sanitary sewer service, also provided by the City of Englewood, that will be built by the developer, will be through private connections to the existing sanitary sewers located around the site. Telecommunications and other utilities are also located near the project site. Generally speaking, the site drains from east to west toward the South Platte. New private on-site detention and water quality facilities have been and will be constructed as a part of this development under separate applications. 3 neighborhood meetings were held during the review and approval process. The first was held on June 22nd, 2017, the second on October 11th, 2017, and the last meeting was held on May 23rd, 2018. In addition to the neighborhood meetings, additional outreach to garner input about the proposed project was conducted through reaching out to adjacent property owners through door-to-door meetings. As a follow-up to the door-to-door outreach that also included distributing flyers, neighbors were invited to an informational luncheon to learn more about the plans. About 80 neighbors were invited to the lunch, and 8 neighbors attended. In addition, an informational booth was set up at Earth Tracks to introduce the project, and 5 individual meetings were held with immediately adjacent property owners. As a result of this additional outreach, we have several letters of support that have been submitted to the city, along with signatures of support on a petition. We will continue our outreach to keep neighbors informed about the project. Concept site plans for Alta Englewood Station, a multifamily residential community, have been submitted by Wood Partners through the city's DRT review process. I'm going to hand things off now to Kyle Henderson, who is here on behalf of Wood Partners this evening.
Kyle Henderson, 7619 South Cedar Circle, Littleton, Colorado, 80120. Thanks, Wendy, and thank you, Commission, for hearing our PUD application. I'm VP of Development for Wood Partners. We are a national multifamily developer, manager, and builder based in Atlanta. We have 20 autonomous regional offices, Denver being one of those. We start about $1 billion of projects every year throughout our different offices. We have been in Denver since 2008, and this will be our 10th start here in the Denver metro market since we opened up the Denver office. We have, these will give you some samples of projects that we've done in the past. Some you might be familiar with, the Glass House at Riverfront Park, City House, Alta City House at Union Station, Alta Alameda Station, and then the one you're probably most familiar with is Alta Cherry Hills, which was developed here in Englewood. So our hope is that this would be our second multifamily project here in the city of Englewood. And on all these projects, we've actually used the same team. You're about to hear from Kathy Parker from Studio PBA, who's our longtime architect. You already heard from Wendy Birchler at Norris Design, our longtime planner and landscape architect. And then HKS, our civil engineer, is also here. They've been involved in all of our deals. We have a consistent team that we work with on all of our projects. So we're excited about, again, doing our second project here in Englewood. This slide is just to help provide a little bigger context. The first question we asked was, why Englewood, and why are we looking in Englewood to do another project? Well, we had a really positive experience here previously with the Alta Cherry Hills project. We had a good experience with the city staff. That went really well, and so we also had a great experience leasing up Alta Cherry Hills. It's been a very successful project. Our residents love the project, and it leased up very quickly, and it did really well. And a big piece of that was because of the employment base that the city of Englewood has, and it's done really well. The other piece was our investors were very happy with the project. It did really well, and so when we went out to the market about this second project, it was also well received from the investors. And in fact, we're already financed for this deal, which is very unusual to be financed this early in a project's conception. And I think that just speaks to the fact that this is a great site and a great community. One of the things you'll notice when you look at this aerial is that we have a lot of complementary uses all around us. Dustin mentioned kind of this horizontal mixed-use concept, and that's exactly right. We have Earth Tracks to the south, and we have the CubeSmart to the north. And we like the fact that in this case we are kind of the final missing piece, if you will, to really help catalyze this, the redevelopment of the old Sports Authority headquarters. The other piece that we love is the fact that we have about over 500,000 square feet of retail that's adjacent to us, and it's walking distance for our residents. We like the idea that our residents will be able to walk over and keep money in Englewood and spend it at the retailers there, and really have that live, work, play component to it. And the other big piece that we like about it is the fact that it's really, honestly, it's difficult to find a 4-acre parcel that's infill in a ring suburb like Englewood, where it's right next to a light rail station. In this case, 2 light rail stations. So it lays out really well. It's a nice rectangular site. It works well for a wrap-type construction that Kathy will talk about in more detail. And then the other component that we like is that it also has access to recreational trails. As you can see on this aerial, looking to the west, which is to the right, we have the access to the South Park recreational trail. But the main component to this is it is a transit-oriented development. So Englewood has 2 light rail stations, Englewood Station to the north, Oxford Station to the south. This particular site sits almost equidistant between the 2 of them, and it's walking distance to both of them. So it's a 9-minute walk if you head south to Oxford Station. It's a 7-minute walk if you head north to Englewood Station. And when the rail trail gets completed, which is scheduled to come online in 2020 according to the Englewood proposed budget, that would help even shorten that distance as well, which is supposed to run parallel to the light rail on the east side of that. 27,000 riders daily are on the C&D lines, which is the 2 lines that run between Oxford and Englewood Station. It's the most heavily ridden lines in the city. And so there's a great opportunity, I think, to capitalize on that. In addition to the light rail, you have bus routes, as you can see in the blue, that our residents will be able to take advantage of. In addition to the ART bus route, as well as the up and down Broadway, and then bus route 51 as well. It goes right near what would be the front door of that. The one thing to note, too, is that currently you have 2 light rail stations, and you only have 2 multifamily projects serving both of those. We do have Art Walk at City Center, which was one of the original TOD projects as part of the redevelopment of Cinderella City. And then to the south, you have the recently completed Oxford Station. We really feel like, and I think planners would tell you as well, that there's a huge opportunity to add some higher density residential to these light rail stations, and that's really what it wants to be. And then I'm going to go back to the previous slide real quick. The other key component to Englewood, and I touched on it at the very beginning, but Englewood has a great employment story, which is to say your employment base at Englewood is great. It's tremendous. And that's what drives a lot of these multifamily projects and the demand for them. And you have Swedish and you have Craig and their 3,000 plus employees and their staff that want to live, work, play in their community, and they don't have a whole lot of options. We found when we did Alta Cherry Hills, that was a big component to the folks that live there and that wanted to move into there. So I think, again, that tells, that clearly lays out why we've already got our project financed and why this kind of lays out itself as being a really good multifamily site. And in fact, from your 2016 community profile, you noted that Englewood has more jobs than resident workers and hosts an influx of workers daily from surrounding communities. And you have a 1.54 jobs to housing balance, which means you have much more employment than you do housing. And so this is really an opportunity to help try to balance that out and get people off the streets, commuting in from other communities, and actually living, working, and playing in their same community. So in closing, before I turn it over to Kathy, when Ogilvie Properties first brought this opportunity to us, it was clear to us that this wants to be a multifamily site. From a land use perspective, from a planning perspective, I think most planners would tell you it makes perfect sense for it to go here. Your comp plan pretty much says this should be multifamily and high-density multifamily to assist with the TOD. And lastly, I think the marketplace has already kind of spoken and said this really wants to be multifamily, and the fact that we've already got a project financed and ready to go. So we're excited about being in Englewood. We're excited about investing in an $80 million project in the city of Englewood and creating a successful project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy Parker.
My name is Kathy Parker, and my address is 2229 Newton Street in Denver, 80211. So my name's Kathy. I am a principal architect at Studio PBA, and our firm has been working with Wood Partners, as everybody has stated, for over 2 decades on multifamily projects in this area. So we know this building type well, and we're really excited to be involved in this area. As Erik mentioned, we've included our concept level DRT submittal in this package as an exhibit that helps to identify how a multifamily project would fit onto the site with this PUD zone district. It's a conceptual plan, so we don't have the exteriors entirely designed yet, but it should give you a feeling for how the community will work. This is a footprint of the building on the site, and there are a number of things to note. First of all, as has already been mentioned, we've got 316 residential units. There'll be a mixture of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and a few 3-bedroom units in a 4-story building. The building height is 50 feet, which is well within the 100-foot height limitation within the district plan. This is a great site for multifamily because of the 4-sided nature of this site. So we've got an opportunity to design all 4 sides of the site well and provide great living spaces on all 4 sides, which is not always the case in every single location where you can provide a multifamily community. Jason Street is our main front door, and that's where our garage entry is, and that's where our residents will enter the building, the leasing center, and the community spaces. But there's really no back door. The western side of the building is actually potentially more desirable for residents due to views of the mountains and open space. But it's also equally as important because it's viewed by the community from Santa Fe and from the light rail. So what we're planning on doing on the western side of the site is pulling the building back by 30 feet from our property line that borders the train tracks. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is to provide fire department access to the back of the building, but also because it's an emergency-only fire department access, we can provide a great community amenity. So this will be a place where you can walk your dog, where people can have outdoor activities. It also provides a connection right across that our open space to the new light rail trail for our residents, just right outside of our back door. So we're excited about that as a community space. Additionally, one of the designs of all of our unit plans and all of Wood Partners' unit plans is to always provide a balcony for every unit. So with open space on all four sides of our buildings, every single unit gets a view, gets fresh air, gets light, and a really nice outdoor space of their own. On the north and the south sides, where we border the Cube Smart and the Earth Tracks, because we're bordering their parking lots, we've got a great opportunity to have the minimal setbacks, which are 5 feet as designated in the district plan, but still have a ton of light and open space. So we're not shading anybody else out, and they're not shading us out. And again, makes for great living on all four sides. One last thing to note in this image is the parking is all contained within the building footprint. So the parking garage is shielded on all four sides by building. You'll never see the facade of a parking garage from the outside of the building. So this is a zoomed-in view, again, conceptual building layout and site plan layout. The things to note here are the parking, like I said, is shielded on all four sides. The entrance is very easy to find on the center of the block along Jason Street. All of the parking for both residents and visitors is provided inside the parking garage, so there will be no need to utilize on-street parking. We've got 417 parking spaces for our 316 units, which is over the requirements for the PUD district plan. Wood Partners is very experienced with apartment communities all across the country, and they look specifically every time at how many parking spaces are needed for this particular building, for this particular target audience, and for this particular place. One of their mottos is that they can never cure an underparked site, so they will never underpark an apartment complex. That being said, their rule of thumb is typically one parking space per bedroom, so not one per unit, one per bedroom. In this plan, we're exceeding that ratio with 1.1 parking spaces per bedroom. Visitors, of course, are also important, especially prospective tenants coming to look at the property. And so the way we've designed the visitor parking is right at the very beginning of the parking garage. It'll be welcoming, it'll be open, it'll be covered, and it'll feel more like a entrance to a hotel than an entrance to a parking garage. So that visitor parking will be very easy to use and will be directly adjacent to the leasing center and the places where visitors are going. Bike parking is equally important in this area. So we're providing 158 bike spaces, which is the Englewood code requirement. That's one parking space for every 2 units. So we'll provide a secure storage area inside of the building for bikes for our residents. Regarding the site, the sidewalks out in front we're planning to expand to 15 feet wide. It's a typical urban pattern sidewalk. as opposed to the current sidewalks in that area, which are only 5 feet wide and are just adjacent to the curb. So with a 15-foot wide sidewalk, we've got room for trees, planting zones, we've got a wide space for bikes and pedestrians out in front of the building, and a safe place for people to exist outside on Jason. We're planting planters and shrub beds in front of the building. We will enhance the sidewalk with paving patterns and colors and just make it a really attractive place to be outside of the building. As I said, almost every unit will have a patio or a balcony, and those with ground floor patios and balconies will have a door right out to the front street. On all 4 sides, in fact, you can walk right out of your unit to walk your dog or to go to Earth Tracks or visit the stores and restaurants. So it's super convenient for this neighborhood. And then last thing on site coverage, just the kind of statistics. I think Eric may have mentioned this, but we're covering the lot. Our building coverage is less than the allowed, so we're covering 64%, where the allowed is 80%. And our landscape area exceeds the requirement with 23% of the site being landscaped. And then talking about the exterior design. So again, we haven't fully designed the building, but we are excited to look at and study and work with Eric and Wade on how a multi-family building fits into this context. This is a view of Jason Street looking along our building toward Earth Tracks, looking south. And it envisions a community that jives with the Englewood, the language and some of the language in the comp plan for Englewood. So our residents, our target audience for this community, we're dubbing urban active residents. It fits perfectly in Englewood's live, work, play definition of goals for these various parts of town that are in transition, especially in this one where the live and the play aspects may have been lacking over the years versus the work aspect. The comp plan says, when it's talking about housing in and around the Englewood City Center, that a greater critical mass of residents, including households that are not necessarily in family-raising years, can support more retail and entertainment businesses, and that their presence contributes to a lively street-level activity. And that phrase is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to promote lively street-level activity. So the building is designed to enhance the experience of Jason Street and of the surrounding neighborhood. So again, you can see in this image the wider streets, wider sidewalks with tree plantings, plantings along the building face, clearly identified entrances to the building and light coming out of windows from the storefronts, lots of units facing the street with recessed balconies, and then the ground floor units that walk right out onto the street. I think that the positive influence of bringing 316 households to this neighborhood can't be underestimated. From the comp plan, we also got encouragement for creating the architecture, creating a blended architecture, so not industrial and not strictly residential in nature. So the question we've been answering with starting on concept plans and with working with Wade and Eric is, how does our residential development fit in this established and very unique part of Englewood while also helping to define going forward? This area has been targeted as a catalytic area, and I'm going to read from the comp plan. That includes a targeted area where redevelopment is poised to occur, an area where the general population would agree that change would be beneficial, and an area in which the desired future condition will be detailed with the goal of meeting the character of the neighborhood while also meeting the vision of the comprehensive plan. So those were kind of guiding principles in our design. We worked with Wade and Eric to write into the PUD an upgraded version of architectural design standards for this PUD. versus the industrial district. So currently there's no architectural design standards in the industrial district. But in your multifamily districts, in your high-density multifamily districts, there's a much more strict definition of how to design the exterior. So that's written into the PUD, and that'll be in the final design. So that includes articulation of the street front, so you don't see a long building, uniform building face, varying the wall textures and materials, using a variety of exterior materials. So we'll be using exterior materials from the area that are appropriate to residential architecture, like brick, metal, storefront glass. Varying the roof line, so while we've got a flat building roof, probably we will have a variety of heights to the parapets. We'll have a variety of overhangs and treatments of the top of the building, expansive use of windows, and then incorporating the stoops in the front porches. And those are items straight out of your typical high-density residential code in Englewood. So for the wrap-up, I'm going to just put this slide back up, which shows projects that over the past 5 to 10 years, we all as a team have completed in the Denver metro area. The majority of these buildings, if we started talking about where they are, were located in formerly transitional parts of town that weren't immediately obvious as places for multifamily residential community. But every one of them has been successful because of the care that we all took to specifically design for the context, to design for the target audience, and to design for the future of the surrounding area. So we are really looking forward to doing that here in this area as well. And I'll now turn it back over to Wendy to conclude.
All right. The proposed multifamily use is consistent with the Englewood Comprehensive Plan that was completed in 2016. Providing multifamily housing promotes a choice for residents and contributes to a balanced mix of housing opportunities for current and future residents. Locating this proposed use in proximity to 2 light rail stations, bus service, and near a mix of retail, civic, cultural, healthcare, office, and industrial uses recognizes and enhances the relationships between land uses and the existing transportation system. The infusion of people will support these existing uses as well as uses in the future. As stated in the comprehensive plan, specific to the downtown Englewood City Center, housing is in demand in this area from downtown Denver commuters and medical district employees. New residents here can help support retail in downtown and Englewood City Center. A goal of the plan is to promote infill development with appropriately sized retail, high-density housing products, and reestablishment of the grid through City Center. The plan also designates this area as a catalytic area, as Kathy mentioned. The addition of Earth Tracks and CubeSmart immediately adjacent to the site is testament to this assessment outlined in the comprehensive plan. The plan also states that Englewood must continue to adapt by offering a mix of housing options, unique retail cultural attractions, and other amenities that support healthy lifestyles. Community feedback included the following. Englewood should also consider mixing housing into existing industrial areas such as near the Oxford Light Rail Station. Supporting plans from Puma also stated the following. Add more housing in and around downtown and Englewood City Center in proximity to bicycle and pedestrian transportation and recreation amenities. A greater critical mass of residents, including households that are not in family-raising years, can support more retail and entertainment businesses, and their presence contributes to the lively street-level activity. MetroVision, the Denver Regional Council of Governments regional plan, outlines principles that offer guidance to local jurisdictions to achieve a shared goal for the future of the metro area to make life better for our communities and residents. This plan stated the following. Englewood, especially City Center, is regionally located in an ideal location for future investment. As an emerging urban center, City Center is critical to increasing the share of the region's housing and employment located in urban centers. The goals of MetroVision will help to decrease the housing and transportation costs as a percentage of income and increase alternative and shared transportation options, as well as an increased focus on safety. Infill and redevelopment will be focused along transit corridors. The proposed Alta Englewood Station PUD will exceed the development quality standards required by the UDC in the I-Zone district, and is substantially consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the city as detailed in the comprehensive plan. That concludes our presentation this evening. I'd like to thank staff for working with us through the review and approval process. Our team is here and available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have plenty of questions. I don't know how you want, if you want us to ask questions and then you can help us figure out who would be best to answer those. If you don't mind, I'm going to start out with a couple of questions just about this process for the district plan. And Erik, I was hoping you might be able to address those. Okay, so can you just help us be clear on what we're deciding on in terms of a district plan? That it's my understanding that whatever we're voting on would include the allowed uses, the height, the parking plan, and density. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we've heard a lot about multifamily housing, but the allowed uses has like a whole laundry list of allowed uses. So what we're presented tonight isn't necessarily, if that's what moves, if we move forward as is, that's not necessarily what would get built.
So to best respond to that, part of the reason what you're seeing tonight is because of the inability of the applicant to do that base district rezoning. So while the ideal, I mean, if they could have just come in and zoned to high density residential, then you wouldn't have this kind of separate process to go along with it. But since this is the case, since the applicant is really moving forward with the idea of multifamily being on that site, what the PUD allows for, say, in a worst case scenario situation where something would not happen, that it would not render the site unusable, that there would be other options for development on the site.
Okay. And the conceptual plan that's included with the district plan, is that binding at all?
No, though I believe the conceptual plans that were submitted are for reference purposes only, to give you an idea of the multifamily development.
And then in like the goals section and things like that, you mention, or the applicant mentions like TDM education and recycling and LEED certification and all of that, which is specific to the multifamily building. And is any of that binding?
I don't believe it is as it is written right now. Everything that would be binding would be that is what is presented to you on the district plan. Mm-hmm. So kind of what you said at the beginning.
The uses, the height, the parking.
Yep. Okay.
Does anyone else have questions on PUD process for this evening and what we're deciding on? Judy?
I have a question about, it says, if a PUD district plan is submitted for review without inclusion of a PUD site development plan, then the Planning and Zoning Commission action on the PUD district plan shall include a recommendation for final action on the site development plan, which may include requiring review by staff only, review at a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and additional review at a public hearing by the City Council, depending upon the size, uses, and complexity of the plan or issues remaining for review. So my interpretation is we not only have to decide on the district plan, but we have to make a recommendation on how the site plan then goes through the approval process. Correct?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So to follow up on that, as a practical matter, just so we're clear, is it reasonable to assume that given the conversation tonight relative to a district plan, that assuming approval, that we could reasonably say, And we would like to see all the site plan specifics, et cetera, as described, to come back before this body prior to going to city council. That's the process, right? We're going to see the next steps, the site plan and all the development itself.
Wade Burkholder, Planning Manager for the City of Englewood. Currently, the district plan states that it will be a staff review. But you are correct. You will have to sign off on that. If you sign off on the district plan, it would be staff only. But the ordinance does state, as Ms. Brown read, that it can come back here, can go on to council. You have those options.
Okay. As a practical matter, working with this particular applicant in the past, in your professional opinion, is it necessary to come back before this body, or do you believe that staff can adequately handle this applicant and PUD moving forward?
My professional opinion is we can administratively approve this, but it needs to be very clear that that has been an action decided upon and discussed. So if you are comfortable, we are comfortable.
And this is the second unit this group has done here in Englewood, correct?
Correct.
Okay. To your knowledge, are you aware of any difficulties on the first unit?
To my knowledge.
Okay.
I know Brooke Bell, our senior planner, worked on that project with the team, and from everything I've heard from him, the project and the relationship was very solid and strong. So I have no reason not to believe that.
Anyone else have questions on lease procedure in that part?
Why can't this be rezoned as high-density residential? I mean, it's in an industrial, but why can't it be zoned?
The zoning requirement states that you have to be contiguous, our favorite word, to a like zone district. So since you're surrounded by industrial, you can't rezone to a high-density residential.
Even a TSA?
I don't believe, I'd have to double check that, but I'm not 100% sure.
I have lots more questions. And let me know, does anyone else have procedural questions before we move on? Feel good about that? Okay. I have some questions in terms of the permitted uses. Eric, I was wondering, do we have precedent for having this many permitted uses within one PUD?
So, the precedent, I would not be able to answer that question tonight. But if you take a look at the use table in the zoning code, basically what you have is kind of what you see on the Exhibit A, where you have like a basically laundry list of uses that you can do on the property. And so but so a lot of the uses that are on that list are also allowed in industrial. And from my understanding, it was, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the point of the applicant to show what they're removing from those uses, from the site, show those industrial, to make it a more kind of residential, more kind of mixed use development.
Okay. Because the way I copied this off of Exhibit A if someone else has that available, but it still has warehouse and storage and check cashing and drive-through facilities for restaurants. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So I think the hard thing for me is figuring out how am I supposed to think about context and character and whether this fits in when there's so many different uses that could go on that site. And the applicant could answer this later, is that if the intent is multifamily, why not stick closer to the permitted uses that are typically on a multifamily site? And I can answer that later, but. Okay, did you have it?
I would, if you wanted to address that, that'd be.
It says on this PUD, permitted.
I do. I'm Don Ryan with Norris Design, 1101 Bannock, Denver. To answer the question regarding the zoning and the various uses, it actually has to do with the process on the site, because we began with the current owner to rezone the site for the PUD. We were actually originally considering the entire 15 acres. Over time, we realized that, in fact, very quickly, that the existing buildings did not need to be rezoned. And so then we subdivided the site as part of this process to create the 4.2 acre site that we want to then rezone. During that process, we actually did not have a user for the 4.2 acres, but Wood Partners came forward during the process of the zoning. So the zoning process actually began before Wood Partners was involved. Once Wood Partners was involved, the multifamily, of course, became more important. As a result, our PUD district plan submittal did change over time. It was originally, it had much more industrial uses, which we had taken out over time through the process with the city. So that's the best way I can explain it, is that this has been a moving and dynamic process. And at the moment, we are very confident that this is going to be a multifamily site. But if for some reason that deal falls through, we want the flexibility for these other uses.
Oh, wait, I have a question for you, which I think you would be the one to answer. In all of the neighborhood meetings, or at least the information that we were provided on the neighborhood meetings, your intention was to sell the site. Is that no longer the intention?
Well, the property owner, Ogilvie Properties, they are the applicant. They would sell the site to Wood Partners.
Wood Partners, but that's not part of this. That could potentially not occur. So you would then be in a position to sell to somebody else, correct?
Correct, because it actually is very linked to your decision and the process for this rezoning.
For the sale to Wood Partners?
Right.
Okay.
So that would make sense then that if Wood Partners is interested in more multifamily, that there'd be the opportunity to change the list of permitted uses to reflect more of that multifamily.
Right, and how I would say this about the PUD district plan. Within the PUD district plan, there are specific parts of that plan, of the district plan, which refer only to multifamily. In other words, if this site is only developed as multifamily, there are specific requirements in the PUD district plan that are more stringent than if it was one of the other uses, or one of the uses that we have that are already in light industrial, for example.
Any other questions about uses?
Sure.
So we are currently under contract on the 4.2 acres. And as I mentioned earlier, we are currently financed on the deal. So we really don't anticipate that not happening. So we fully anticipate that this deal should go forward and that we would build it. However, we certainly understand why the seller would want to reserve the right to have other uses, in the rare instance that something should happen. But we don't anticipate that. Like I said, we're under contract, fully financed, ready to go. So.
Thank you.
anyone else want to lead with some questions?
I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure who to direct them to, but my concern is, how this is obviously a very key area, and my concern is how it relates to the surrounding areas. And I'd also like, I think this is somewhat similar to the general ironworks process where we had a district plan and then they came back with a more specific site plan. I believe that was, and I would hope that that process would be mirrored here, because I think there's a lot of specifics that we need to get into if this does go forward as is proposed or hoped for at this time.
In terms of the surrounding site, surrounding properties, I can relate the proximity of this location to the city center where we're sitting right now, and the soon-to-be kicked-off redevelopment process for this property, which I think, we don't know. There's going to be a lot of public input, robust public meetings to decide what the best fit for this property is. I would not be surprised if higher density is not going to be part of that. I think it will be a part of that. So I think getting a denser population to this area is going to drive other uses and activities. So I think the proximity of the residential at this location, given the 2 light rail stations, is a good fit for this location. I think it is a prime redevelopment site, as already has been mentioned. And activating that area, as has been mentioned as well, is also a positive for this area.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of all that, and I agree. It's a completely key site. My concern is, if the rail trail goes in and you connect it with that,
right,
that's great. But in the meantime, there's a lot of issues I've experienced crossing Hampden and the connections and that sort of thing, and maybe that's why we need to get, we need to get the specifics of the site plan and get into that nitty-gritty stuff. That's what I'm.
And if I could answer Commissioner Brown's earlier question, the PUD and the TSA does not have to be a contiguous, so it would be an option for a standalone zone.
So while you're here about the TSA, because I did a detailed comparison of these uses with MUB1, TSA, and the I1. And I don't know that you as applicants would be in a position to go through it in detail, but the TSA covers everything that I have heard that they are asking for, except for like a restaurant with drive-through service, a sales room with, I mean, to me, it seemed like I'm just struggling with the logic of this, and I know you explained the process that you went through, but this easily falls within the definition of a TSA because it's right in the middle of 2 light rail stations. It would have been a lot easier for me to follow the logic if it had just been a TSA. And I'm not trying to, do the thought process after all you've been through. But I'm just struggling with, because then I question, why do you need a group living facility? So I'm starting to question the uses that are on here that don't match up with the TSA, because I presume, and I haven't been on planning and zoning long enough, I wasn't a part of the development of the TSA, but I presume that the TSA uses were thought out specifically for this case. Multifamily in an area co-located with light rail. I feel uncomfortable, I'll be honest, with second guessing what apparently was a well thought out process, or it wouldn't have been part of our code. So I'm just struggling with why it wasn't a TSA. So, and I don't know that you can answer that standing here tonight. So that's my struggle. Okay, great. That would be awesome. Okay.
So,
Yours is nicer than mine.
so this is, I just have this one copy, but, yeah, okay. Now let's see if we can find a reasonable facsimile of what I'm going to be talking about here. So this is essentially straight out of your code, your list of uses. What the logic behind this was essentially to take 3 zone districts, the MUB2, the TSA, and the I-1, and take those 3 and kind of put them together, but take out many of the ones that are in the I-1 that were at least, too heavy, for lack of a better word. But the issue with the TSA only was it did not have enough of the I-1 uses in it as permitted. And because we are adjacent to I-1, and that's the existing zoning, we wanted to keep some of those I-1 uses in there. So the colors on here actually mean something. What we've done here is we've isolated just the MUB2, the TSA, and the I-1 in these columns. And I-1 has been put in bold to show what those current uses are. So the line items in red, we never had proposed. We took them out from day one on our proposal. The line items in yellow have been taken out through the process with city staff. So we started with a long list, and through the review process, we've removed everything in yellow as well. So that's the logic, and that's also the process. This is just the first page. This is the second page. This is the third page. All these in red we never had in there. And the ones in yellow were taken out through the process. And that's the last page. So that's part of the logic and the process. Hopefully that answers your question. Happy to
Well, it explains the logic.
elaborate.
I'm not sure I agree with it.
if you'd like.
Okay. No, I did my own comparison. Thanks.
Questions? Anyone else? Or keep going? Do you have more questions, Judy?
You can go. You might. Okay. How does this, and you guys also may not have an answer for me, but how does this fit in with what the plan is for the city center, what's going to be going on in the city center, hopefully, with the retail redevelopment and there's a plan. I haven't been privy to it yet. I think he's presenting sometime in the next week. But can you help me understand if this fits in with what they're trying to do through the Weingarten bankruptcy issue?
So the presentation will be Tuesday evening at City Council on the initial redevelopment plans. In my professional opinion, this project fits hand in hand with what I believe you will see come out of that redevelopment process for this Weingarten property.
Okay.
Would you say this development, as in a multifamily development, fits in, or any of the uses that are in the long list of permitted uses would fit in?
Multifamily.
Okay.
Primarily.
I got a question on the multifamily. Obviously, that's, it looks very good for that being the use, but I mean, is there any way for us to make sure that happens? I've seen a lot of plans and a lot of conceptual plans, and it ends up very different, so that's my concern.
There will still need to be a site development plan submitted. I don't know that would give true comfort to you all in terms of uses, but it would be another layer of review for you all if so chosen. I think getting into the actual specific language of the district plan is the best way to get the level of comfort I think you're asking for, and making sure that should it not be multifamily residential, there are some other review opportunities or safeguards in terms of uses. So there might be some language opportunity there to add to the district plan, something we'd have to talk about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I know with the apartment complex, well, more than two actually, the development here at the city center, the apartments, and then, there were some things we learned there that went into Oxford Station. I'm hoping we will be able to apply the lessons learned with this project as well. Thank you.
I think the unique thing about this project is that Norris Design is working with the property owner as well as with Wood Partners. And so the idea here was, as Wood came into the project, we made sure that the district plan was something that we could develop their multifamily project under. And so we worked hand in hand with Don, who works with me at Norris Design, and along with the Wood Partners team, we worked together to make sure that what's in that district plan will work for this multifamily project. And that was the intent on working together and making sure. We did a lot of double checking to be sure that that would work. And so the intention is not to come in with another multifamily project that looks different than what we're proposing right now. The idea is we carry through this conceptual plan through a site development plan process that would be reviewed by city staff, and that would be based on generally your multifamily requirements that are laid out in the code. That's more stringent, very much more stringent than the architectural requirements in the industrial zone district as that's written today, because there's basically no standards in there. So that's the intent here, and I think that part of the reason why we worked so diligently to make sure that the district plan would work with us is because we would like to rely on a staff approval of that, because extending out the process is going to be problematic for the financing of this project. And Wood Partners can speak a little bit more to that because that's more of their thing, but that's my understanding, and that's why we endeavored and worked literally. It feels like a really long time now. You heard when the first neighborhood meeting was. This project has been going on for quite some time, which is great that Wood Partners got connected up with Ogilvie, because I think it is a great use for this site. But we did work together and had many, many meetings together with staff where the whole entire team almost, was at these meetings to talk about what would go into the district plan to make sure that as this multifamily project hopefully moves forward, if you decide to approve this district plan with that allowed use in it, that's kind of the crux of this whole thing, is that we would be consistent with that plan and hopefully give you some level of comfort that you're going to get what you want because of what's in the district plan. We would have to follow that. We don't really have a choice not to, unless we want to come back and amend the district plan, and correct me if I'm wrong. So the idea here is that we wrote it so that it works, that we're going to get a really great project because that reflects on our whole entire team. And so hopefully that helps explain how we got to where we're at right now.
I have a question. Now I have a question after you just said that. I'm trying to figure out then, where does the district plan end and the proposed development start? I'm trying to understand better what we're actually approving. Are we actually approving like parking ratios and all that sort of stuff, or?
You are, just like
okay.
Chair Townley explained earlier. It's really about the parking, the building height, the uses essentially, and Wade and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, it's all those things that are in that district plan that we would be held to moving forward with any project, but our hope is that we're going to get to move forward with a multifamily project that would adhere to those standards. Does that make sense?
So I'm a parking nut. I'm a stickler about parking. And I get the question all the time, why are you approving units with there generally are 2 people are living there, and that's like 1 car for 2 people, and that's kind of what we're at here. Are we to the level of, in the previous project on Broadway, are you guys charging for parking there? Because I see a lot of cars on the street.
Do you charge? Sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
You're referring to the Alta Cherry Hills project at Hampden and Broadway. And yes, that they do charge. It's pretty standard. It's a market.
I saw $40 somewhere.
Yeah, pretty standard to charge for covered garage parking stalls. And it's really, honestly, it's almost just become part of the rent, is kind of the way it's positioned and the way it's done, which is you get the room, you get the parking stall, and it's kind of all bundled together. But that's market for structured parking garage apartment multifamily deals.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I have one more question. In the transportation impact study on page 5, see, we actually read this stuff. The proposed mitigation measures, it says there's a surplus piece of property on the northern border of the self-storage facility currently owned by CDOT that should be acquired with the condition that the access to Jason Street be located further south to the proposed right-in, right-out only access. Is somebody planning on purchasing that? That's just, it says that should be purchased with the condition. So I'm just curious why that's in here.
Yes, we are trying to buy that.
Oh, you are? Okay. Thank you.
I have a few questions on bike ped access and the rail trail that's mentioned. It says in, I don't know which plan it is, but that the rail trail would be a 10-foot wide trail. Has that alignment been designated or conceptualized?
For a portion of the trail. There has been a grant application submitted a year or so ago for that portion of the trail immediately adjacent to this parcel along railroad right-of-way. That grant was not awarded to the city as it was a transportation improvement project through Dr. Cog, and those being very competitive in the region, we placed just outside the funding range for that project. But that portion, we do have some conceptual plans and designs for.
And is that on the property, this property side of like the chain link fence where the railroad goes through? Or I'm trying to figure out, like, would that rail trail, would we need an easement through this property, or?
It would not. It's just to the west of the chain link. So
okay.
It's not on this property at all.
Okay.
They do provide the access to it from their parcel, but no.
Okay. A couple other questions you might be able to answer. Can you tell us who has the authority in terms of determining the fee in lieu for the park, for parks, and how the number was, how you came to $385 per unit?
That number was set by a prior community development director, several, not possibly directors back, Director White, and it's set as policy.
Okay.
That's the number charged.
Okay. And then I think it's like the dog park open area, is that only for residents of the multifamily, or is that open to public?
I understand it's just for residents.
Okay. Any other questions at this time?
I just had a quick question about the parking. Since the parking was brought up, I was wondering what the ratio is over at the Alta Cherry Hills as a point of comparison for something that's not as convenient to transit.
I believe it's 1-3 at Alta Cherry Hills.
So it's the same, actually. Okay. And that, as there seemed to, Okay.
Oh, that's all right. That's my bad. Alta Cherry Hills is a non-TOD project.
Right.
Meaning it's not near a light rail station, so it needs to be parked at a higher ratio than a TOD project. So it's parked at 1.8 per unit and 1.3 per bed.
Okay.
So that's, and when we say that I know it gets confusing sometimes. Once the project's built, I guess just a point of clarification, because there can be confusion around how guest parking is treated sometimes. And I think in the code, guest parking is not included in the ratio, but once a project is built, and when people are quoting parking ratios of a project that's built, they just take the total number of stalls and divide it by units and beds and call it, that's the ratio. So there was some confusion earlier about trying to figure out ratios. Sometimes I think the code, like I said, the code pulls out guest parking. When we do the ratios, we always include it. So it's just kind of you need, I guess, clarification on how that's done. So I just wanted to be clear on that. So.
Are there any other sites that you think might be comparable that have similar parking ratios?
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we commissioned, there was a parking study done that really looked at kind of the suburban TOD locations similar to an Englewood station or an Oxford station. Oxford station was parked at 1.1 per bed, 1.1 per unit, and 0.9 per bed. Art Walk at City Center is parked at 1.4 per unit and 0.94 per bed. Pretty standard, like we said, we start $1 billion of projects every year around the country. So our personal threshold is we won't go below one stall per bed, and that's really what our investors require as well. That's a big component, and I think as Kathy mentioned, we just won't allow ourselves to underpark a deal because you can't fix an underparked deal. So our experience has been we've done a lot of TOD projects here, so that really has become kind of the market or the where you need to be to make sure you're adequately parked.
And
oh, sorry. And this is got a new swearing.
Everybody gets sworn in.
I do. I'm Mike Moore with Harris Coker Smith, 1120 Lincoln Street, Denver. Just wanted to get up here and talk about parking a little bit. We've worked with Wood Partners, obviously, a lot in the past, and we've done, we're starting to see more and more questions about parking, obviously. And more jurisdictions, we're doing parking studies where we go out and collect empirical data, actual in-the-field data, current on projects. And we've done some very comparable projects lately over the last year where we send a poor young engineer out to these apartment complexes in the middle of the night to count cars and parking spaces. And we do this to primarily get you guys comfortable that what these guys are telling you, which is a successfully parked project, given the ratios that are a little bit different than what your code says, actually work. And we did submit a parking study, I believe. We submitted this right. And there's comparable 5 different projects in here, maybe in your packet somewhere. They're all TOD sites, which are similar to what we're looking at. Cherry Hills is not what we consider a TOD site. We consider this a very TOD site. And long story short, what those 5 comparable projects showed was that when you send a poor engineer out in the middle of the night and they count cars, the highest ratio per dwelling unit that we got out of those 5 TOD sites was 1.14 total. And so our sites actually proposed to be parked at 1.4, including guest spaces. So we're 0.3 above the ratio that we're seeing on TOD sites. So even though the parking seems low against your guys' current code, we're seeing consistently across the board when we go out and actually collect data in the field that's current for projects that are leased up and operating, that the parking's sufficient to support the project.
yeah, I do think that the parking is efficient. I called out Cherry Hill specifically because that's not a TOD site, and it does require the more parking than this site would. Of course, the key to the not requiring the parking is access to the light rail stations, and that's something that is going to be very important because that was an issue with the last development with the Oxford station, and we've got a lot of parking on the street now that we didn't have, and we don't want to replicate that situation. Obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. And just so you guys know, for comparables, if for a bigger garden deal, something that's more suburban, your parking ratios are typically up around 1.8 to 2, because the apartment developers want that parking to be there, because a lot more people do have cars, don't bike, those kind of things. But yeah, I understand your point. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on parking? Well, you got me up here? Cool. Thanks.
Have an opportunity for public testimony.
One more question.
Okay. One moment.
No, I see. Oh.
Has there been thought to the perhaps unintended consequences of people trying to cross Hampden on foot? And perhaps there's some mitigation that needs to be done, or got the traffic guy back, parking guy back.
Oh, you're the traffic guy too, huh?
I'm back. Obviously there's a signal there. It's a very busy roadway.
There's not a signal on Jason. There's a signal to the east.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we will certainly work with city staff during site development plan to address those concerns. We would anticipate that those kind of things would come up at that stage. We obviously want safe access for not only our residents but the community. And those are the kind of things that, the traffic impact study you guys have before you was for the overall development. And if you guys think it's warranted, we could certainly do some kind of traffic impact study or walking feasibility study, pedestrian study for those kind of safety issues. There are very basic traffic engineering principles that revolve around safe crossing and signal timing, those kind of things that we could certainly do to try and mitigate that situation.
You'll have an opportunity again later. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to public testimony. It's an opportunity for the public to provide testimony regarding this case. All the comments that you have would be directed to the commission, and we'd like to establish a 5-minute time limit for those comments. And I'm going to call forward the people that have signed in. We have Rochelle Oldright. Come on up.
I will. Hi there, I'm Rochelle Oldright. I live at 3670 South Huron Street in Englewood. And I've lived there for nearly 2 years. It'll be 2 years in November. And I really enjoy living in Englewood, and I love the close proximity that I have to everything. My biggest concern with this entire project comes down to parking and traffic. Both of those things. With 316 apartments, so we can figure maybe there's going to be another 450, 500 people living in my neighborhood. It's going to increase traffic at some point. So I understand this is going to probably happen, and I can't change that, and I'm not trying to change that. What I want to address is how can we mitigate people speeding down my street? How can we mitigate my street not becoming a thoroughfare for all these people trying to get on Hampden? What about parking? I drove by the site. I've gone and I've toured the climbing gym, and actually it's really fabulous. But I went there on Sunday, and the parking lot, I mean, this was during a snowstorm. the parking lot was packed. The parking lot was packed to the point that I'm concerned that this apartment building is going to impede upon the climbing gym people's ability to park there. So where are these people going to park? We haven't really discussed that. And then we also have the 3,900 square feet that's adjacent to that, that's included in that building that's currently unoccupied. What's going to happen there, and what's that parking going to be like, and how are all these people going to get there and to and from there? There are limited accesses to go both directions on Hampden, and there's few ways to do that. The easiest way, at least for me, is to go down Galapago. And the other thing, and Michelle, I'm glad you brought this up, is about pedestrian. Was it you that brought up the pedestrian crossing? That's also an issue, and I can see that as an issue for people living there as well as myself. I've recently started riding a bike and trying to do that and trying to get healthy, and getting across Hampden to get over to that bike path. It's like I'm taking my life in my hands to cross that street. Even when I push the button, I have to run across the street pushing my bike. And so I think some kind of a bridge might be cool, and that might be safer for people. I also think that somehow access to the light rail for these people that are going to be living in this apartment building, because that's going to be a big attraction, is going to be great. But if you drive down Windermere, where that station is at Oxford, there's no place to park. How many people are going to walk that far? I mean, I understand it's, 7 minutes to walk that far, but when it's snowing and it's cold and you want to get on the light rail, you're probably going to want to drive there and park your car, even though it's only a 7-minute walk. Other people don't like to walk. And there's no parking there, and there's actually very little parking at the Englewood station parking lots. If you go down there, try to find a place to park. I go down there to take my grandson to the park, and it's hard to find a place to park. So those are my concerns, and I just want you to take that in consideration, and how can we do that and make this work for everyone?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have either Kurt or John Holberg.
Kurt Holberg, 3615 South Huron, Englewood, Colorado. Our family has owned property adjacent to this development and in Englewood since 1921. We own 3 buildings within a block of this development, one that is immediately adjacent on Jason Street, immediately across the street. I've attended 3 of the public meetings, 2 of which were on the PUD, and we asked a lot of questions about the multifamily development. Very few details. In fact, no real details were given on the multifamily development other than the laundry list of what could be put there. So there hasn't been a lot of public discussion about the specific site plan that's going to be here. And I would encourage you to get that once you get a site plan. We didn't really get the details about the multifamily until we had the luncheon with Wood Partners. Now, I want to be clear that our family and our firm supports development in Englewood, and supports responsible development in Englewood. We have a real strong concern, and I guess I'll focus on the multifamily site, and also the change to the main PUD, where you're changing your code big concern is parking. We're adjacent to that property, and we see that this use is going to impact that, our tenants, our building. This proposal actually changes your city codes. You're going from 1.5 units per dwelling, plus. So if you do the city code, and it's in your Exhibit F, it shows your code, the units should have, if they're having 316 units, they should have 544 parking spaces. The plan, the PUD plan, or the change to the district plan, actually drops that to by 100 parking spaces, 400. I go by Alta, Cherry Creek daily. I commute by there, and I'd like you, and I appreciate you've identified parking there. I'd like you guys to go look at that and see the amount of parking on the street and the impact to those neighborhoods. I don't live in the neighborhood. It'd be nice if we had some of the people in the neighborhood to see it. But if that is really, and we've met with Wood Partners, they've been very open with us and discussing things. We have a disagreement, obviously, about how many parking spaces we have. But they've been very responsible, and we support them. We don't support parking they're proposing. You're actually approving less parking than they're actually going to show. So we're very concerned about the parking, and Alta Cherry Creek has tons of cars all on the parking on the street. So we encourage you to at least continue to enforce your current ordinances. I even think they're a little bit low. You need to at least stick with those. If you do approve this project at these low parking rates, I guess we need your support to discuss parking limitations on the street. It's really true that the project doesn't need any street parking, which we've been told today, then we could limit the parking to 2 or 3 hour and no overnight parking on the street. That would allow our tenants the impact to our businesses. If you have any questions, and we have a letter to offer.
Questions?
I have a quick question. Do you have parking for your employees in the
Yes, we do.
properties? Okay, thank you.
All three of our buildings have parking to the city code.
Thank you.
I have a question about I do go through that area pretty much daily, and there's a lot of traffic over there. Do you have any thoughts about how this is going to impact that traffic?
The traffic guys can tell you that there's not going to be it's going to be very similar. Sports Authority had a lot of traffic coming through there. They had a lot of employees and used a lot of parking. I mean, unfortunately, this project takes up 4 acres of that parking now. I mean, they're going vertical and absorbing it. So there's certainly, I think the traffic is probably going to be, Sports Authority at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., going down Jason was just a zoo, and getting in and out of Jason. So, I see this as being very similar. I think they're going to have the same, they had 1,000 huge group. The other impact, the bigger impact, I think, is going to be just the residents in the areas, the foot traffic, the people. There's just going to be a lot of people living there 24/7.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the traffic from the Sports Authority site, but that's pretty much 2 times a day, and this will be more.
Right, 24.
Yeah.
So it's going to be it's going to impact us. Although people leave if you go up by Alta Cherry Creek, that's the same thing. I drive through there at 5 o'clock at night, and you can barely get through there with people trying to park. People leave for work and come back to work, and it's difficult. Parking's a real critical issue, and I think it can be done right. I think you can build a project with the right amount.
Thank you. We have Richard Lauria.
My name is Rich Lauria. My address is 3646 South Jason Street. I have a small business directly across the street from this project. I don't have a problem with development in Englewood or anywhere. That's the way things should be if it's done right. My biggest problem, or concern I should say, is parking. We're back to parking. Right now you have the Elks Club, and when they have events, they fill the street up. They are pretty respectful because they keep most of their parking up toward that end. We have a business down the street that is kind of a club business. Members are there in and out all day long purchasing different items, and that whole front of our street where my business is covered with cars all day long. From what I'm hearing, the amount of parking that they're providing, I don't know if it's per bedroom or unit, isn't going to be enough. I think people who don't have, if they have 2 cars per 1 bedroom, somebody's in the street. And that's where the concern comes in, especially for the businesses like us that are not retail. We're not looking to get any of that business. We're more service oriented, so they won't be part of, we're not part of retail getting any benefit from it. That is my biggest concern. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking because I don't need to. I think we've hit the parking enough. But parking is an issue. Now, as my landlord just was up here, he is, I think, discussing things about how do we mitigate parking during the day, limit it. That's one solution. That is not something I would like to see. I would like to see the parking enough in the complex to keep the cars off the street, because we have different needs for parking. If someone comes to visit us for the business that we do for them, where are they going to park? If they got to walk down the street. Not long ago, there was a problem. There is, I think, a statute with Englewood that you have to be so many feet off a corner to park. Nobody knows how to judge that amount of footage, so they were getting tickets. So I wrote an email to the Englewood, I believe it was the mayor at the time. This is several years back, and he actually called me. I was pretty impressed. And he and I talked, and then I talked to the police commissioner of Englewood, and lo and behold, by the end of the weekend, the next Monday, there were signs up that showed people where they could park and from where. I would hope that Englewood could look at this parking issue that is going to affect the businesses right across the street through this process. Again, I don't have any complaints about the project itself. It's the parking that's the issue. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Dan Harris.
Dan Harris, 3679 South Huron Street. So I'm representing D.L. Cohen Construction. We're a small framing contractor that's only about a block and a half just southeast in the Englewood Executive Center. And so a project like this is really kind of cool because this is actually something we actually excel in. We frame multi-family buildings around the Denver area. So having really one this close is really cool. Couple things. One, because we own our own office space there, we fully expect the valuation to increase. So that's kind of neat. But also, because we do framing, we hope to bid on the project. All our crews live in pretty close proximity to the area, so it's easy for them to get to, and so it'd be a nice project if something like this came through. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Arthur Lynch. Arthur? Okay. Marcus Pochner? Sorry if I got that wrong.
That was perfect.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Marcus Pockner. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My address is 130 Rampart Way, Denver, Colorado. I am here if you have any questions at all. My firm has done the community engagement, specifically on the multifamily. I do want to say we thought that was of such importance that we actually, after the 3 required meetings that you have heard about, we specifically met and reached out to all the adjacent property owners. We met with them about these type of issues, parking on the street, the activation of the street, their parking, and how to address that. We think that was a very important part to kind of sit with them and also understand that moving forward we will continue to work with them. You all know this street very well. There's a lot of loading zones. There is 2-hour parking on one side of the street. So, of course, those are things that the city would work on and regulate that. So we wanted to be sure and understand that we were very open to that dialogue and would continue to work with them. I think also we made that a point to go to those businesses. We also flyered over 80 adjacent neighbors and invited them to an informational lunch so they could come learn more about the site plan, go through all the parameters, ask any questions they had. And then I want to be sure and mention that you have a few letters of support in your file. There are additional letters of support coming in. Earthtrex has actually been incredibly supportive of this project. They have a corporate letter coming in, so much so that they invited us in for an informational table to really meet with some of their guests. They think this is a remarkably complementary use for what they have there. I think lastly, I just want to underscore, we've really spent a lot of time talking about the former use, the former traffic, and the parking issues, and really how this is not as cyclical on AM and PM peak times. And then I will just say respectfully, also the incredible opportunities of a TOD and the bicycle parking. We are providing 1 bicycle parking for every 2 units because that's what this site should be. It matches your comprehensive plan. It matches the engagement of the trails and the future rail trail. We think that is just as important as well, or another element of that parking picture to this. So I just want to offer that. I'm here if you have any questions whatsoever. But again, we thought it was very important to go door to door and actually engage with all of our neighbors. We want to be good neighbors. We certainly want to be here for this project. Thank you very much.
You said there was 2-hour parking on one side of the street?
One side of the street, yes, exactly.
I'm not familiar, from where to where?
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. I'm just kind of seeing there's actually a loading zone by a number of the businesses, and then there is some restrictions in the area of 2-hour parking. So we looked at that as we kind of walked around to kind of be, cognizant of this comment, right? Is there street parking on the street? That's obviously something that the city can go through and regulate, and something that we certainly understand that discussion. But again, we wanted to really get that feedback and understand our neighbors so we could work best. I will also say, I think a lot of these businesses, we hopefully really support them by bringing residential and people that actually live in the district as well. Great. Yes, sir.
Will you be following up on this process as it goes forward, or are you just in the initial stages?
Yeah, thank you very much for actually asking that. I should have said that. Actually, the 2 folks, the first lady who spoke and the gentleman beside her, are residential neighbors that we haven't spoken to yet. We've already asked if we could meet with them. We will meet with all of these neighbors. These are absolutely the things that should continue. And frankly, I think it's incumbent upon us to go through that process. We will go through that, and you will hear our engagement with Earthtrex, CubeSmart, a number of those surrounding businesses. We met with the vets today. We have a meeting with the Elks Club. We are meeting with all of those neighbors, and actually have found an incredibly responsive neighborhood to the project.
Will you be working with the city as well in terms of, this is a great site and it has great potential for people to use the light rail, but as it stands now, a lot of them are going to drive the block or 2 because it's just, there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, and I, I'm not the parking expert, and all know that, but I think you've heard that from us, how familiar we are with that process. Frankly, how TOD's sites demand it, but I also think you have to kind of know your neighborhood a little bit, right? And this is going to be a change in pattern from what was there before, the engagement, the enlivenment of the street, and I don't mean from a parking, I mean pedestrian. So, of course, I think that's something we want to continue with at the city, and we absolutely will do that.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other members of the public here that would like to provide testimony that didn't have a chance to sign up? Okay, great.
I'm not sure where he was talking about 2-hour parking. I don't think he meant Jason Street, because Jason Street is open parking. There is no 2-hour limit. Just a question.
Okay. Thank you. staff, do you have any rebuttal, or do you want to respond to any of the comments or testimony? Or the applicant?
Hi again. With respect to parking, bottom line is, regardless of opinions or those kind of things, we can provide staff with empirical data that's current that shows that we're self-parked within our garage and contained specific to this site. And then just looking, and just for comparison purposes, looking at the Sports Authority building and what it was before, roughly the size of that building, there's chip generations we can do to determine peak hour information for how much traffic's coming in and out of there. And I would estimate that what Sports Authority's traffic was before it left compared to what the multifamily site would be is probably 2 or 3 times greater than what the multifamily would produce. You see commercial a lot more intensive in the peak hours in the AM and the PM, whereas multifamily, they still have a peak, but you have a lot more distribution throughout the community where people are leaving at different times. Some people work at night, some people work during the day, those kind of things. So typically you see multifamily and residential traffic being less severe than commercial traffic, which this site's actually heavily zoned for traffic. And while we didn't do the traffic study, it was the master developer's engineer, the traffic studies did indicate that the adjacent roadways do have capacity and operate at reasonable levels of service, Bs and Cs. D's usually the worst around this community, and that did account for 300 dwelling units, which were a little bit more, but I mean, I'd be confident that if we reran the numbers, we would still be able to provide that information and show that to city staff and to commission and council. Thank you.
When you were coming up with your parking numbers, did you look at, I'm sorry, I don't know this off the top of my head, the ratios required for TSA versus multifamily?
I did not know, but we could.
I don't know if that was something that staff had on hand. I thought for a TSA it's 1-to-1, but and we can get back to that. Thank you. Commissioner? Okay.
Just a few comments. I know Alta Cherry Hills has come up a few times as a project that we developed, and if it was adequately parked or not. It's still in conversations with the property manager, plenty of capacity within that garage. So not to say the residents, there couldn't be some residents that park on the street, that's certainly possible. But there's plenty of capacity in the garage. And the adjacent single-family neighborhood is, a 1930s neighborhood with no parking, no garages, that kind of thing. So when you see a lot of on-street parking in that neighborhood, it's pretty typical of a neighborhood of that era because it didn't provide parking. It wasn't part of that. So we really feel like Cherry Hills was parked adequately, just to address that comment. The second part, and I appreciate that the neighbors, and I think Marcus addressed it as well, we want to be good neighbors, and we understand that we're going to bring change, right? I mean, that's just the nature of it. And so we want to be cognizant of that, and so that's why we're in dialogue, and we're saying, how do we make sure we limit our impact on the existing businesses that are already there? One of the things that we think is a perfect, simple solution to address the concern of our residents parking up and down Jason, which is, I think, a major concern that I've heard consistently from a few folks, is to just make that all 2-hour parking up and down there, and then you don't have to worry about folks doing the long-term parking or overnight parking or whatever the case may be, and they'll be in the garage using it as they're supposed to. Actually, right now on the west side of Jason, there's no parking allowed. So we could actually add new parking, on-street parking that's not currently there, make it 2-hour, and increase some of that street parking. So these are just ideas that we've started to talk to the neighbors about because we want to be good neighbors, and we think that's important. And while we certainly understand that they have concerns around parking, we've done this quite a few times, and we think we feel we have the data and the knowledge around what it really takes to park these. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have other questions for staff or for the applicant?
I do have one question. I mean, I was curious about what we came up with a height limit. I assume it's probably because most of these units this is what's economically viable and this is what makes sense. But can you give a little bit of thought about why we're limiting it to 40 feet and where that came from?
I think it's 100 feet.
It's actually 100.
Is what is in the proposal. Yeah.
100 feet.
4 stories.
Yeah, so that just seems to be pretty common in what's been going on with some recent PUD developments in the city. I think it was Alta Cherry Hills had a max height of 78 feet, and we did have another development that had a max height of, I think it was about 80. So that's just kind of seems to be common for the mixed use multi.
Is there no reason to exceed that because something higher than that would assume would not be economically viable?
I don't think I would be able to answer
okay.
that necessarily.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. The gentleman indicated that there's no parking allowed on the west side of Jason Street, which I believe is correct. I don't think I've ever seen cars on that side of the street. Is it, it is an industrial area down there, and so there are, big trucks that need to get around down there to deliver goods and services and things like that. So if we did go ahead and put parking on the west side of Jason, would that truck traffic be able to get around sufficiently?
I don't think I would be able to answer that.
Jason's pretty wide, but
I would probably want to talk with the traffic department.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
I don't know if we can take more additional information, but we can follow up on that. Any other questions for staff or for the applicant? About calling people back. Can we get additional information from public about the question that Ms. Austin brought up?
If there's someone here you want to have come up today, yes. But if you close the public hearing, then the public hearing is closed.
Did you want to respond to the...
West side of Jason that has no parking associated with the turn. They come out Jason. But the rest of Jason, adjacent to our building, across from this project, there is west parking.
Thank you.
I had a question. I wanted to talk about some of the possible ways to connect people to the light rail other than having them drive. I mean, I assume most people will be aware that there's a kind of a phenomenon now with these little scooters. There's also bicycles, bicycle programs. I know you're having bicycle parking, but that's not, it's a very different thing. I mean, I wonder if anybody could talk about how you look at these types of opportunities to connect people with the station without them having to get in their car.
They're looking at each other.
More than a guess?
Sorry. I think what we would be able to do is provide in the leasing center maps that show where the transit stations are, bus routes, that type of information to make it available for the residents so that they're aware of what's essentially right down the street from them, both to the north and to the south. I would also say that it sounds like there's limited parking for both of the stations, and so I think that people are going to have to rely on different ways to get there, because even if they try to take their car and park down there, there's not going to be available parking. So I think that they're going to stay parked, and I suspect that some residents here will not even have a vehicle because they are going to rely on transit to get around. And so my belief is that they'll use the parking that they have available at the project and take advantage of that and get to the station by foot or by bike or by scooter, if you guys allow those in the city of Englewood, which I'm not sure if you do or not. But they'll have alternative ways to get there, but we can provide that information so that it's available to them, because it is really part of the amenity of this site is that they have that ability to have that access to the transit. So.
Sorry, just wanted to address your question. We just did a quick distance off Google on the width of Jason itself.
Cool.
And it looks like it's about 43 feet. So if you parked on both sides, take out 16 feet, you'd be left with 27 foot of width, which is generally very acceptable for not only most vehicles, emergency access, those kind of things, but just two-way traffic's usually you need maybe 20 to 22 feet wide. So there should be plenty of room to be able to park on both sides of the road on Jason.
Nice, thank you very much.
And any luck finding the parking ratios for TSA? Any chance? Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Last call. All right. Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second the motion.
Aye.
Yes.
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 Yes. Do we have a motion or discussion you'd like to start with? Motion first.
Move the approval of the district plan as presented and discussed.
Does anybody want to see the approval of the site plan come back through?
No, not yet.
No, we didn't.
Second.
So right now, the motion on the table is to approve as written, but we can have some discussion and decide if there's any amendments to that. So, move forward.
Does anybody on the commission, would they like to see the site plan come through the commission?
Mike.
Yes, I think that's imperative.
I think it would be good to see the site plan. The way it's presented right now, I think is okay, but we also don't know if that's the exact uses that are going to go forward, or we don't have that. We don't know that right now, so I would like to see it.
I would agree.
How do we get that changed then?
The only concern I have with that is the way this is written, they would have to go through a complete public hearing again in order to have that. It wouldn't just be our review. I guess I'm not feeling like that from a time standpoint. I understand the cost of development, and I feel like if they're confident that they would be able to keep the intent, I'm fine with staff review.
So maybe if there's not significant changes to the uses that are in the conceptual plan.
Yeah, that's the challenge. My struggle is the number of uses that are allowed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to hold up the intention of the multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
But I am concerned that it could end up being a recycling facility. And then where are we? We haven't done our job. That's.
I personally, I don't need to see it. And I'll tell you why. I don't think that Wood Partners is in the business of creating amusement parks or any number of these things. What they're in the business of doing is presenting and building and creating an environment that we're familiar with. Okay? And I don't know that it necessarily does us much good to see that, what fundamental material decision are we going to make that's going to be different if we don't like the color of a window frame. I don't think we're going to get to that level. And I don't think that any of the potential uses, I think the reason why the potential uses were put out here, this laundry list, the reason why this is out here is because this is what is available in a heavy, dense use, industrial use. The owner of the property would have the ability to do any one of these things, or some combination thereof. To say that we would need to see the site plan because we want to make sure that we're not having an amusement center or a kennel daycare or a recycling center or anything else in here which would be permitted, which is just about everything under the sun, would say that we don't trust our city staff and that we don't believe that our attorney is sitting here and is going to say, hold it, that's not within the intent of the conversation. And I don't think there's any question regarding, if it were me and I would not put this out here. Just, you can't respond to that. But I would never have put this out here because this is the laundry list of all the things you never want, right? This is what it is. This is all the things you don't want in today's day and age. But it's afforded to the property because zoning is king. I think staff is perfectly capable of managing a PUD. I think they've done this on small scales. I think they've done this on large scales. I think it gives them the opportunity to do their job. And frankly, if they don't do their job, I think it gives us the opportunity to have a question mark relative thereof, with all due respect. See, I knew we were going to be good. And so I don't really see much need to do this. And having worked with developers in the past, everybody here in this room has had the opportunity to do loads of 1982 aerobics up and down and up and down and up and down to come up here. We've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, haven't had a chance to move, and I haven't heard anybody say, if we can get this through, we're putting up a Ferris wheel. And staff is not over there going, yes, a new Ferris wheel. That's what we need. Elitch South. I don't see it. So I have no desire to see this in the future. I don't know what material input we would give it. I think there's all sorts of things relative thereof to parking. I just have a much greater trust of staff than that. And I don't think it's not doing our job. I think the question is, what is our job? Our job is governance. Our job is not picking out shrubbery color or something else. It's just my thoughts on it.
I'd like to say that, I do have some concern too, as you mentioned, that with these other uses, but I think that's really less of an issue. I don't think we need to get into the weeds of the specifics of, the types of things that you talked about, or even the specifics of the traffic and where the parking is. But I do think that we need to direct that. I do think that's a concern that we've had from previous projects and has been brought up again tonight. And I do think, that we should look at requiring those good intentions to be part of the project, because I've been involved with a lot of projects, and there's always a lot of good intentions. When there's not something to codify those good intentions, they often don't happen.
Weigh in on whether or not you'd want to see it?
Well, I guess the reason for me saying I'd like to review it is because I think some of the comments from the audience, they're concerned about parking, and frankly, I am too. But I also hear Mr. Freemeier's point that we don't need to micromanage the governing process, and so I guess I'd be willing to forego having it come back for a review. But saying that, if there are issues with the parking, it's water under the bridge once we approve it. It's just going to be issues with the parking. But it will impact how I view future projects if it becomes a big issue with this one.
You know, we have in the past approved projects with conditions, and also we've had several projects approved that were told after the fact that we probably should have added some conditions, so I think that's something we need to talk about.
Patrick, did you want to weigh in on whether or not you want to see that?
Well, I have faith that they want to build it the way that it's shown. That's the way I'd like to see it built. I'd like to confirm that they're going to do that. I'd like to see it come through again as the site plan, but I'm really excited about the project. I want to see it go the way it's been presented.
I mean, to give you an example, when I say with conditions, I think they fully intend to follow through with the working with the neighborhood and the parking study, but I'm just suggesting that we could add that as a condition of the approval.
I have an idea. I think I know how to solve this impasse and keep these folks as efficiently developing as possible. Why don't we do this? If we reasonably think that staff will act in a professional manner, then why don't we, given the fact that we've all had the parameters laid out to us, the condition would be that we would approve said district development with the understanding that if there is a material, this is where it requires professional staff judgment. If there's a material difference in what is presented in the site plan, at that point, if staff believes there is a material difference to what was been discussed tonight ad nauseum, then it will come back to this body. So it gives some teeth to what we're doing. It allows efficiency on the developer standpoint. It puts the onus on staff, and it's something we're hoping to hear a great report on how it all worked out just exactly as we've discussed, without delaying them, without saying, well, you can't get on our schedule for 2 months, and on and on and on, because time is money.
Would you like to amend your motion?
I would like to first of all, I'd like to amend my motion to be that we approve the district plan as proposed with the caveat that there be no material changes from that which was discussed this evening.
Second the motion.
So that's the motion that we have on the floor. Is there anyone that would like to add anything else to that?
I would like to add a motion that we do a detailed traffic and station access study as part of the as a condition.
Any discussion on that?
The detailed traffic and station access.
And by traffic, you mean not just vehicular, but multimodal?
Correct. Correct.
Any discussion on that?
I'll accept that. Is there a second?
Second.
No discussion? We're ready to call the vote? I'm sorry.
Well, according to code, we don't have the site development plan. Include a recommendation for final action on the site development plan, which may include requiring by staff only, which they've already decided. Mr. Meyer's motion. Or a review at a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which that's not what they want to do unless there is a major development or change. And additional review at a public hearing by City Council. So they would have to add the additional review at a public hearing by City Council because it is.
I'd like to amend
The motion to allow for the City Council review.
So I'd like to amend my amended motion to allow for the review as per code of the City Council. Thank you.
I do approve this project. It's a good use of the, it fits in with the plan, and with the considerations that we've added, I think it would be good to go forward.
I also approve this plan. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the city goals. That area being an area of a zone of transition, I think it's a really good fit. So I approve it.
I vote to approve the plan.
I also approve. I appreciate all your hard work. Thanks.
Vote to approve for the following reasons. A PUD is necessary because under the I-1 zoning, it would not otherwise be allowed for all the reasons stated earlier. I believe it's also helpful with stormwater detention, as that will also be addressed in this from a market standpoint. It's already financed and ready to go. I do like the access and walkability of this with the 15-foot wide sidewalks. I do like the fact that there's only a 64% coverage, and to that extent it could be 80%, but it's not, and that it's 23% landscaped. What I do like is the fact that it fits well with the overall plan to live, work, and play, and to that extent I'm referring to the redevelopment of what otherwise was an industrial property, affording only one of those three concepts to actually come to fruition, and to actually allow all three of them to do that in consideration of the redevelopment plan of the area in which we sit this evening. There is one critical agreement that we need to come to, is that in order to have a viable community, we must have one that has people. In order to have people, they will naturally drive businesses. So businesses will flock to get their money. That is a good thing. I do have concern relative to the parking issues and the convenience factor of people. You can put 1,000 parking spaces in front of their face, and they will park at what is most convenient, even at risk of getting a parking ticket. That is human behavior. I don't know how to do that, and that's why I'm not a police officer, that and for many other reasons. But I do believe there are concerns that we do need to have addressed by staff throughout this process. But I am wholeheartedly welcome you again to our community, and thank you so much for building here.
Thank you, Mr. Freemeyer, for such a thorough response. I believe the district plan meets the requirements for our municipal code, and I don't see any negative impacts for what is presented in terms of the multifamily. And as outlined in the staff report, the PUD also meets several of our goals that are outlined in our comprehensive plan for housing, as well as being able to access transit and walk and bike. Yes. Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we're on to attorney's choice. Oh, sorry. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one then. Staff's choice? Thank you.
Very quickly, council last evening voted to enter negotiations with the new interim city manager, Virginia Egger, former manager for the town of Avon. Council is very eager to get her on site to help with the transition into finding the new permanent city manager. So that process is going. Hopefully she'll be here within the next 2 weeks or so. And just a reminder that our November 6th study session meeting will actually be in this room. So just FYI for that meeting coming up. That's all I have.
Thank you. Attorney's choice? Okay. I'm sorry, Nancy, did you have anything for staff's choice? Okay. And then commissioner's choice? Anyone have anything?
They did a reading of the ADUs yesterday. How did those go?
Be continued.
The issue's been tabled until November 5th. 5th or 6th? 5th.
Why is that?
Well, primarily because of the lateness of the hour. They did not get to the topic until about 11 o'clock. And then they want to, there's some wording in the ordinance with corporations we've discussed before and ownership issues. So there's some language we're still tweaking and trying to work out to suggest to council for possible amendment to the ordinance. And there was some question as to whether they wanted to introduce new testimony or new information and whether it had to be a public process. And so they now have that language. And I think they're going to review it, and hopefully November 5th, we can talk about amendments to the ordinance as they see fit.
Okay.
Anything else?
I just want to, I won't be here on November 6th.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're adjourned.
Yay.
That was funny. Already knew these.